Imagine a man who not only walked with God, but he crossed skies that no human being should cross. The Bible dedicates only a single sentence to him. Enoch walked with God, and he was no more because God took him. But what really happened there? What if I told you that there are ancient accounts claiming that Enoch was taken beyond the known heavens? That he saw celestial structures, imprisoned angels, cosmic portals, and secrets that would change the way we understand humanity? What if these reports were removed, ignored, or even silenced throughout history? Today you will discover what is behind the rise of Enoch and why his testimony is considered one of the most mysterious and controversial in antiquity. Get ready, because this story begins where the Bible seems to end. Before the flood, before the tables of the law, even before Noah built the ark, there was a man who disappeared from earth. No death, no grave, no explanation. His name was Enoch. The Bible mentions his destiny in just one enigmatic sentence, too short for someone who, according to ancient manuscripts, crossed celestial dimensions, talked with luminous beings, and witnessed judgments that have not yet happened. But why is so little said about him? Some ancient texts claim that Enoch was not only taken to heaven, he was taken beyond the heavens, permitted to men. He would have seen angels imprisoned in abysses of fire, portals guarded by indescribable beings, the mechanisms that govern the sun, moon, and stars, and the final destiny of humanity. If that's true, why isn't his book in most Bibles? Why was your story reduced to a single line? Today you will discover what may have been hidden, and why the name of Enoch still echoes like a forbidden whisper in the history of faith, because maybe Enoch's ascension was not just a miracle. Perhaps it was a revelation that few were prepared to hear. To understand the mystery, we need to go back to the beginning. Enoch appears in one of the oldest passages in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, chapter 5, a genealogy that lists generations since Adam. And there, in the middle of a repetitive sequence of names and deaths, something different happens. The pattern is always the same. He lived for so many years, he gave birth to children, and he died. But when Enoch's turn comes, the text changes. Enoch walked with God, and he was no more because God took him. He doesn't die. He doesn't age until the end. He just disappears. This completely breaks the pattern of the chapter. But what does walked with God mean? In the original Hebrew, the expression indicates deep intimacy, constant communion, total alignment with the divine will. It wasn't just faith, it was closeness. So intense that according to the text, God took him, but where did he go? The verse does not explain. It doesn't say if he went to heaven. It doesn't say how it happened, does not describe witnesses. It's as if the story was interrupted at the most important moment. And this raises inevitable questions. Why does such an extraordinary event receive only one sentence? Why are there no details? And why, centuries later, do texts appear saying that this story was much bigger than it seems? Interestingly, Enoch is also mentioned in the New Testament in the letter of Jude, which directly quotes a prophecy attributed to him. This means that in the time of the first Christians, there were already writings circulating with the name of Enoch. Then the question starts to get more serious. If the ancients knew more about him, why do we know so little? Maybe because the full version of the story isn't on the pages we're used to reading. And this is where the mystery begins to deepen. If the Bible barely talks about Enoch, where then did the detailed accounts of his visions come from? The answer lies in an ancient manuscript known as the Book of Enoch, a text that claims to contain revelations received directly by him during his journey through the heavens. But here's the intriguing point. This book is not part of most modern Bibles. He was excluded from the canon. and for centuries it practically disappeared from the West. Until in the 18th century, complete copies were found preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the only Christian tradition that officially kept the book in its scriptures. This raises a powerful question. If the text was known to ancient Jews and early Christians, why was it removed? Scholars claim that the Book of Enoch was written between 300 BC and 100 BC during the Second Temple period. In other words, long before Christianity officially emerged. Even more impressive, the book is cited directly in the Bible. In the letter of Jude, chapter 1, verses 14 and 15, there is a prophecy attributed to Enoch, almost word for word from what is in the Ethiopic manuscript. This means that the authors of the New Testament knew this text. So why was he left out? Some say it was due to authorship issues. Others point out theological differences. There are also those who argue that the content was too complex, full of cosmic descriptions, angelic hierarchies, and revelations that went beyond common understanding. But there is a more provocative hypothesis. And if the problem wasn't authenticity, but the content? Because the Book of Enoch is not just a religious text. He describes angels who descended to earth and taught humanity forbidden secrets. Giants who were born from this union. Celestial structures organized on multiple levels, and a detailed cosmic system of the functioning of the universe. It's not just spiritual, it's structural, it's almost technical, and maybe dangerous. If the Book of Enoch drastically expands on what Genesis only briefly mentions, so we are facing something greater than a simple apocryphal text. We are facing an ancient tradition that may have been considered too advanced to remain in the official scriptures. But what exactly did Enoch see? That's what we're going to find out now. According to the Book of Enoch, what happened after God took him was not just an ascent to heaven. It was a crossing through multiple celestial dimensions. Enoch describes being led by angels, beings of indescribable appearance shrouded in intense light, through different levels of heaven. It was not a single sky. There were layers, organized structures, kingdoms with specific functions. He reports seeing giant portals guarded by celestial sentinels, regions where stars were imprisoned for disobeying divine orders, a deep abyss where fallen angels awaited judgment, and a glorious throne surrounded by fire where God himself sat. The description is too detailed to seem symbolic. Enoch speaks of movements of the sun and moon, of gates through which the stars enter and leave, of precise celestial calendars. It is as if he is observing the mechanisms of the cosmos behind visible reality. But there is an even more intriguing point. In some traditions associated with him, such as the one called To Enoch, it is mentioned that he crossed over to the seventh heaven, a level reserved for the direct presence of God. And this raises a delicate question. Were there limits to where a human could go? If so, Enoch overstepped these limits? The idea of permitted heavens arises precisely from this spiritual hierarchy. Not all levels were accessible. Some were reserved only for celestial beings. However, Enoch didn't just see these places. He received instructions, knowledge, and authority. In certain texts, he is transformed, clothed with glory, and elevated to an almost angelic position. This is not just a spiritual journey. It's an ascension, and perhaps this is exactly what makes his story so uncomfortable for some traditions, because Enoch does not appear as an ordinary man who visited heaven. He appears as someone who was initiated behind the scenes of the universe. But what he learned there may be even more disturbing. And that's what we're going to reveal now. During his journey through the heavens, Enoch was not just an observer. He was informed, instructed. He received explanations about something that would have completely changed the course of humanity. According to the Book of Enoch, Before the flood, a group of angels called Watchers descended to earth. They did not come as ordinary messengers. They came with intention. These beings, led by figures such as Semjaza and Azazel, would have made a pact among themselves. They went down to Mount Hermon, and there they made a decision that violated the heavenly order. They had relationships with human women, and from this union, the Nephilim were born. Giants described as violent, dominating and corrupting the earth. But it wasn't just that. The Watchers also taught humanity knowledge that, according to the text, was not intended for men at that time: metallurgy and weapons manufacturing, cosmetics and adornments aimed at seduction, enchantments and sorcery, advanced astrology, manipulation of roots and herbs, secrets of celestial movements. It was technical knowledge, strategic, transformer, but also destructive. The Book of Enoch states that it was this accelerated advancement without moral maturity that plunged the world into violence and corruption. And this is where the narrative connects to the flood. According to the text, divine judgment came not only because of human wickedness, but by the contamination caused by this angelic intervention. Now think about this. If these accounts were widely accepted, they would completely change the way we understand Genesis 6. They would change the origin of evil. They would change the explanation of the flood. They would even change the history of civilization, and perhaps this is exactly why the content was considered problematic, because he suggests that some of human suffering began not just with Adam's disobedience, but with a cosmic rupture between heaven and earth. And Enoch, he was chosen to witness the judgment of these angels. What he saw next was even scarier. After the Watchers corrupted humanity and spread violence across earth, the outcry of men would have risen to the heavens. And according to the Book of Enoch, God responded, but not directly to humans. He responded to the angels who had broken the divine order. Enoch describes that powerful archangels, such as Michael, Raphael, and Gabriel, were sent to execute judgment. Each one received a specific mission. Raphael was tasked with arresting Azazel, the one who would have taught weapons manufacturing and spread corruption. He was thrown into an abyss, covered in darkness, to await the day of judgment. Gabriel was ordered to act against the giants, the Nephilim, who were devastating the earth. They would be destroyed, and their spirits would become the so-called evil spirits that roam the world. Michael was assigned to imprison the leaders of the Watchers in the deep valleys of the earth, chained until eternal judgment. Enoch claims to have seen this place, a dark abyss, burning cracks, angels trapped in torment. And the most intriguing, the Watchers themselves ask Enoch to intercede for them. They know they are doomed, but they believe that Enoch, having access to the heavenly throne, could take a plea for mercy. Enoch rises again, present the petition, but the answer is definitive. There will be no forgiveness. The judgment is irrevocable. This moment changes everything, because here Enoch is not just an observer, he is a mediator between heaven and fallen beings, and the report leaves a clear message. Not even celestial beings are above divine justice, but there is something even deeper to this story. If the Watchers are arrested, and if their descendants were destroyed, why does evil continue? This is where the mystery expands beyond the past. And it leads us to the question that few ask. If Enoch witnessed all, why did your version of the story almost disappear? If the Book of Enoch was known in ancient Judaism, whether it was preserved by religious communities, and if even the New Testament quotes his words, why isn't it in most Bibles today? To understand this, we need to talk about something called the biblical canon. The canon is the official list of books considered inspired and authorized by religious traditions. But this list didn't just fall out of the sky. It was formed over centuries. In Judaism, after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, religious leaders began to define which texts would be preserved as official scripture. Books widely accepted in previous communities began to be questioned, among them the Book of Enoch. Some scholars point out possible reasons. The text was not written directly by Enoch. He would have lived before the flood. His apocalyptic language was highly symbolic and complex. His angelological descriptions were too detailed. Its content could generate interpretations that are difficult to control. Furthermore, in early Christianity, there were many texts circulating: Gospels, letters, revelations, prophecies. The church needed to define which ones would be considered final authority. And the Book of Enoch, although respected by some ancient leaders like Tertullian, ended up being left out. But here a hypothesis arises that generates debate to this day. The problem was authenticity, or the impact of the content. Because the Book of Enoch dramatically expands the Genesis narrative. It presents a structured cosmology, explains the origin of demons, details celestial hierarchies, and it suggests that the spiritual world is much more organized and complex than the traditional biblical text reveals. For some, this was enriching. For others, it was dangerous. Over the centuries, the book was left aside in the West. It almost disappeared, until manuscripts were found in Ethiopia, preserved by a tradition that never removed it. This raises an inevitable question. The Book of Enoch was excluded out of theological prudence, or because it revealed a spiritual structure too advanced to become official doctrine. We may never fully know. But one thing is certain. The story of Enoch did not end in Genesis, and the revelations attributed to him continue to provoke questions that span centuries. And what he saw about the future may be even more impressive. If Enoch had merely recounted past events, his book would have been impressive, but he claims to have seen something even bigger, the future. According to the so-called Book of Parables of Enoch, he received detailed visions about the final judgment, the destiny of the righteous, and the definitive condemnation of evil. He describes a glorious throne, a heavenly court, books being opened, beings being judged according to their works, centuries before the apocalypse of John. But there is something even more surprising. Enoch speaks of a figure called the Son of Man, one being exalted, pre-existent, chosen before the foundation of the world, who would sit on a throne of glory to judge kings and rulers. This language is extremely similar to what Jesus uses in the Gospels when referring to himself. This raises an intense debate among scholars. Did the Book of Enoch influence the messianic language of the New Testament? Or do they both reflect an even older prophetic tradition? Enoch also describes the final separation between the righteous and the wicked, the restoration of the earth, a kingdom of peace and justice, the definitive defeat of corrupting forces. And unlike many symbolic visions, the text presents a structured sequence of events. There is order, there is chronology, there is purpose. It doesn't just describe the end, but a fresh start. And here's the intriguing point. If these prophecies were known among Jews of the Second Temple period, they shaped the expectation messianic of the time. In other words, when Jesus spoke about judgment, the Son of Man, and heavenly thrones, his listeners already had categories to understand these ideas. And this places the Book of Enoch in a much more relevant historical position than many imagine. But there is one question that remains. If Enoch saw the final judgment, why was his vision almost forgotten? Maybe because she didn't just talk about the distant future. Maybe he would talk about cycles that repeat themselves. And that's exactly what we'll see now. Although it has been deleted from the canon of most traditions, the Book of Enoch has never completely disappeared. In fact, its influence silently spanned centuries. In Second Temple Judaism, ideas about angels, demons, final judgment, and the Son of Man were already circulating widely, and many scholars recognize that the Book of Enoch was one of the main sources of this worldview. The Dead Sea Scrolls, found at Qumran, include fragments of the Book of Enoch. This proves that it was read and valued by Jewish communities before Jesus' time. In other words, it was not a marginal text. It was part of the theological debate of the time. In early Christianity, leaders such as Tertullian demonstrated respect for the book. The letter of Jude quotes him directly, and concepts like imprisoned fallen angels and cosmic judgment echo in 2 Peter and Revelation. Even outside the canon, its influence remained. But as the centuries passed in the West, the text became rare, almost forgotten, until copies, preserved in Ethiopia, once again caught the attention of the academic world. And then something curious happened. Over the past 100 years, interest in Enoch has grown exponentially. Researchers began to re-evaluate its role in the formation of Judeo-Christian theology. Scholars of apocalyptic literature have once again analyzed it, and, in the modern world, he began to be cited in debates about spirituality, ancient cosmology, and even alternative theories about human history. Why? Because the Book of Enoch offers something that many feel are missing in traditional texts: a detailed explanation of the origin of spiritual evil, an organized structure of the invisible world, a cosmic narrative that connects heaven, earth, and final destination. For some, this is just old literature. For others, it is a forgotten piece of the spiritual puzzle. But regardless of the theological position, one thing is undeniable. The figure of Enoch never ceased to provoke questions. And perhaps the reason is simple. It represents the idea that there are more layers to reality than what we see, and that not all knowledge is easily preserved by history. Now, one last reflection remains. If Enoch ascended beyond the heavens, and his story spanned millennia, what does this mean for us today? Enoch appears in the Bible as a single sentence, but behind that phrase, there is an entire tradition. A man who didn't die, a man who crossed the skies, a man who witnessed the judgment of angels, a man who saw the end before the beginning ended. His book has been preserved by some, questioned by others, deleted by many, silenced, or simply considered too complex to become official doctrine. Perhaps the most important question is not whether or not the Book of Enoch should be in the Bible. Maybe the question is, why does his story continue to arouse so much interest thousands of years later? Because deep down, Enoch's story touches something deep within us. The idea that there is a reality beyond the visible, that the universe has organized spiritual layers, that justice is not forgotten, that evil has a deadline, and that human destiny is connected to something much bigger. If Enoch really ascended beyond the permitted heavens, so your story isn't just about mystery, it's about access. Access to the invisible, access to knowledge, access to the throne. And perhaps that's why his name resonates to this day, like an ancient whisper reminding us that not everything that was revealed remained. On the official pages, yes, but the truth does not disappear. She reappears. And now I leave the question to you. If I had access to the secrets that Enoch saw, would you be prepared to meet them? What if I told you that there is a man in the Bible who did not die, who was not buried, who simply disappeared from the earth, and who, according to ancient manuscripts, ascended beyond the permitted heavens? Have you ever stopped to think about what the phrase really means? Enoch walked with God, and he was no longer because God took him. Taken where? As? Why? And why does the Bible dedicate only one line to someone who, according to ancient texts, crossed celestial dimensions, witnessed the judgment of fallen angels, and received revelations about the end of humanity? Today, we are going to talk about one of the greatest mysteries of antiquity. Enoch rose beyond the permitted heavens, and his report was silenced by the church. But was it really silenced or strategically forgotten? Before you draw any conclusions, I need to ask you another question. Why does almost no one talk about the Book of Enoch? An ancient text cited in the Bible itself, preserved for centuries, respected by Jewish communities from the Second Temple period, and yet absent from most modern scriptures. Coincidence or discomfort? The story of Enoch is not just curious, she is disturbing because it touches on themes involving celestial ascension, fallen angels, watchers, nephilim, divine judgment, forbidden knowledge, and hidden structures of the universe. Words that arouse fascination but also concern. Imagine living in a world before the flood. A world where, according to ancient accounts, celestial beings descended to earth and taught secrets that humanity was not ready to receive. Now imagine that a single man was chosen to see the consequences of all this. Not from the perspective of earth, but from the heavens. Not just from a sky, but from multiple heavens. Spiritual layers. Guarded portals, thrones engulfed in fire, abysses where angels await judgment. This is no ordinary story. It's not just a symbolic narrative. It is a story that describes celestial hierarchies, cosmic movements, and decisions that would have altered the destiny of humanity. And here's the point that makes it all the more intriguing. The Book of Enoch has all but disappeared from Western history. For centuries, many believed it had been lost forever, until ancient manuscripts reappeared, preserved far from the great religious centers of Europe. Why was this text not included in the official canon? Why were his detailed descriptions of angels, heavens, and doomsday left out? Was it just a theological issue? Or was the content too advanced, too complex, too explosive? If Enoch truly ascended beyond the permitted heavens, then he had access to something few humans have ever experienced, the behind the scenes of the cosmos. And if he reported what he saw, who decided that this report should not be part of the official narrative? Do you see how this story completely changes the way we understand Genesis, the flood, and even the concept of evil? But before we move on to the deeper revelations about the Watchers, the giants, and heavenly judgment, I want to know one thing. Have you ever heard of the Book of Enoch before? If this topic arouses your curiosity, leave your comment below and share this video with someone who likes biblical mysteries, apocryphal texts, and ancient revelations, because what comes next is not just a forgotten story, it's a journey through the forbidden heavens. And now that the question has been asked, we need to go back to the beginning, to the only officially recorded phrase, the one that seems simple, but which may hide the greatest secret of antiquity. And before we continue this journey through the forbidden heavens, I need to tell you something important. If you really want to understand what's behind the ascension of Enoch, the fallen angels, the forbidden knowledge, and the revelations that spanned millennia, you need to go beyond superficial curiosity. This is not a common theme. It's not just another old story. We are talking about content that involves biblical mystery, apocryphal texts, vigilantes, nephilim, celestial judgment, and spiritual structures that are almost never explored in depth. And for this type of content to continue being produced, it needs your participation. So I want to make a direct invitation to you. Comment below what you already knew about Enoch. Do you believe the Book of Enoch has been silenced, or do you think his exclusion was just a natural theological decision? Your opinion is essential because this channel is a space for investigation, reflection, and conscious debate. When you comment, you are not just interacting, you are showing the platform that this topic matters. What to talk about biblical mysteries, fallen angels, permitted heavens, and no old cement still arouses interest. And this means that more people have access to this content. Now, let me ask you something simple, but very important. If this subject has already aroused your curiosity so far, leave a like. The like may seem small, but it is what drives the video to reach other people who also seek to understand the spiritual behind the scenes of the story. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, now is the time. Because in the next few minutes we're going to dive even deeper into the revelations attributed to Enoch, and you won't want to miss the next parts of this investigation. Here we explore ancient texts, forgotten prophecies, hidden apocalypses, and connections that are rarely explained clearly. Sign up now and activate the bell, because the next videos will expand this topic even further. And the more you understand the historical and spiritual context of these stories, the more sense everything starts to make. Understanding the content is essential. It's not just watching, it's reflecting, it's questioning, it's comparing. It's about seeking discernment, so participate, comment, leave a like, sign up. Because what comes now is not just a continuation of the story of Enoch, it is the beginning of the most revealing part of this journey. Now that we understand that Enoch was not an ordinary character and that there is an ancient book attributed to him, we need to return to the most intriguing point of all. What really happened after God took him? Because this apparently simple expression can hide one of the most extraordinary experiences ever recorded in ancient spiritual literature. According to the accounts preserved in the Book of Enoch, he was not just taken to heaven in a symbolic rapture, he was led by celestial beings through the organized structures of the cosmos. We're not talking about clouds and harps. We are talking about portals, levels, celestial chambers, regions of judgment, and areas reserved for specific functions within the spiritual order. The narrative describes an invisible hierarchy, as if the universe were managed by layers of authority and responsibility. Enoch reports that he was guided by angels who shone like burning fire. The description is intense. Crystalline walls, rivers of light, celestial mountains, and giant doors guarded by sentries. Each passage was not just a physical shift, but a dimension transition. He notes that the stars were not just bright points in the sky, but entities, obedient to established laws. Some, according to the text, were imprisoned for having transgressed divine orders. This image completely changes our perception of the biblical cosmos, and here begins something even deeper. Enoch doesn't just see, he learns. He receives explanations. He listens to the reason why certain angels were judged. He understands the reason for the corruption that took over the earth before the flood. He discovers that the so-called watchers, angels, who were supposed to watch over humanity, have crossed a forbidden boundary. They descended into the physical world, interacted with human women, and taught knowledge that accelerated the moral corruption of humanity. These teachings included advanced metallurgy, weapon-making, detailed astrology, enchantments, and manipulation of natural forces. The text suggests that the problem was not knowledge itself, but timing and intention. It was knowledge out of time, delivered to a humanity that was still spiritually immature. And this generated violence, pride, domination, and imbalance. While Enoch witnesses these revelations, he also witnesses something shocking: the judgment of these angels. They are imprisoned in abysses, awaiting the final day. Some ask Enoch to intercede for them. That's a fascinating detail. Imagine the scene: fallen celestial beings asking a human for help. This places Enoch in a unique position, almost as a mediator between two worlds. When he presents the request before the divine throne, the answer is definitive. There is no reversal of the sentence. The judgment is irrevocable. This part of the narrative emphasizes an important keyword in our niche: heavenly justice. No matter the position, no matter the origin, there is spiritual responsibility. Another point that draws attention is the description of the so-called Son of Man in his visions. A glorious figure, chosen before the foundation of the world, who judges kings and rulers. This image echoes strongly in the more messianic language that appears centuries later in the Gospels. This raises a profound question about theological influence and ancient oral tradition. Notice how this narrative expands Genesis 6, expands the understanding of Nephilim, expands the concept of fallen angels, and even the origin of evil spirits. We are not talking about a peripheral detail. We are talking about a complete spiritual worldview structure. And perhaps this is exactly why the Book of Enoch causes so much discomfort. He organizes the invisible. He systematizes the spiritual world. It connects heaven, earth, and final judgment into a coherent sequence. But now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe that knowledge can be dangerous when delivered at the wrong time? Comment, "forbidden knowledge," if you think there is something that humanity was not ready to receive. Or comment, "heavenly justice," if you believe that no being, neither human nor angelic, is above judgment. Because what we will explore next delves even deeper into this cosmic structure and leads us to a revelation that connects the antediluvian past with prophetic events that were yet to happen. If you've made it this far, that already says a lot about you. It means you're not here just out of superficial curiosity. You stayed until the end because you really wanted to understand the mystery of Enoch, the permitted heavens, the fallen angels, the forbidden knowledge, and everything that may have been silenced throughout history. And that makes all the difference. Now I want to know who actually watched until the end. If you have been with me until this moment, comment below on the phrase, "I crossed the heavens with Enoch." This way I will know who is part of this group that seeks to go beyond the obvious and delve into biblical mysteries and ancient revelations. If this content expanded your vision, left questions in your mind, or awakened something different in you, leave a like. The like is what shows that videos about the Book of Enoch, vigilantes, Nephilim, celestial judgment, and apocryphal texts need to continue appearing to more people. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, now is the time. Because here we don't stay on the surface. We explore the spiritual behind the scenes, the mysteries of antiquity, the hidden connections between ancient texts and prophecies, always with depth and reflection. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next videos, because what's to come deepens these revelations even further and connects Enoch to other events that almost no one explains clearly. And take the opportunity to watch the next video that is appearing on your screen now. It was chosen exactly to complement everything you just saw. If you are interested in this topic, the next one will expand your understanding even further. See you in the next video.